Hey guys, it is March 18th, 2018. It's Q&A time. Today I'm going to do cardiovascular health. This is a repeat topic. I've already done this one before, but these are completely new questions. This was by request, so I'm going to go ahead and do it again. Um, there are actually some pretty good questions here, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right into it. I have a couple of tabs pulled up as well, just some studies and some different information I'm going to share with you guys as I go through this so you kind of understand what the questions are asking and what's going on. So, first one is latest research on DECA death. Basically, what he's referring to here is QT interval disruption. QT intervals are part of the electrical cycle of the heart. And there was a study in 2015, I believe is the year of the study. I can check. It is, yes, May 2015. The study was actually titled Nandrolone plus moderate exercise increases the susceptibility to lethal arrhythmias. So with QT intervals, disruption, basically what we're looking at is, especially elongated QT intervals, what can happen there are erratic heartbeats, really fast heartbeats, things that if it gets completely out of control, it can actually lead to sudden cardiac death. So that's where the arrhythmias obviously become dangerous. So this study is kind of pointing a finger at nandrolone and exercise. So I'm not really sure why it chose to put the two together, other than the fact that maybe if the person with the arrhythmia, if they exercise too vigorously, then they will obviously be more susceptible to their heart rate increasing some. But outside of that, I'm not exactly sure why they are connecting the two. But anyhow, what the study actually said in conclusion, the findings suggest that chronic co-administration of nandrolone with moderate intensity endurance exercises facilitates the VF occurrence in rats. So it's a rat study. Complementary studies are needed to determine mechanisms of this abnormality, essentially. So there's a couple issues with this. I think that most anabolics actually could lead themselves to this issue. It's just that decadurabolin might be a little bit more, might cause it a little bit more so than others. And this is just kind of anecdotal and from just kind of connecting the dots, because I don't think there are any other studies on, specifically citing all of the different anabolics that people would typically use. So this is really all we know, and I don't think since this 2015 study there has been any more studies on the subject. But what I can say is that elongated QT intervals are potentially dangerous. They can cause these arrhythmias. It is an actual heart condition. It can be genetic. A lot of people that have it, it can just simply be a genetic issue, like I said. This is a good reason to have your ECGs done. If you know that this runs in your family, have an ECG done. Maybe be cautious, even extra cautious if you're using these kinds of substances. And that's going to be probably your best precaution, because they can measure those QT intervals and see what's going on. So going back to the study real quick too, just for point of reference, the subjects were administered 5 milligrams per kg of nandrolone. So again, rat study, not sure how the metabolism between the rats and humans is really going to translate over, but if we go 220-pound person in kilograms, it's about 100 kilos. It's 5 milligrams. So that's about 500 milligrams twice a week. That's not really out of the realm of what people do. It's kind of right in that realm. Maybe a little high for some people, but in reality, that's pretty much where a lot of people are at. Like I said, maybe slightly higher, but again, have your ECGs done. I think we need more research on this. I don't think there is any other good research on this currently, but we do know, like I said, that the elongated QT intervals are problematic and can potentially cause the really crazy arrhythmias that can cause sudden cardiac death, which are obviously not good. Is not good. So, kind of rambled on that one. But next question: healthy TRT dosage between cycles and even on cycle dosages to avoid higher risk. Okay, so the TRT thing's kind of funny because in the bodybuilding community, people kind of throw that term around, usually TRT, testosterone replacement therapy. So people, most people listening to this, I'm sure, know what that is. Really, the idea of testosterone replacement is to bring your testosterone levels, free and total test, up to normal range, maybe high normal range, and not above that. And it's going to vary person to person on the amount that is required to do this. But typically, just at least from the blood work I've seen, what doctors have prescribed to clients that I work with and other people that I know, anywhere in the 1 to 200 milligrams per week of testosterone is typically about where people fall into normal range. And sometimes it's more, I would say a lot of people kind of float around that 150 mark, give or take. So these people that do 250, 300, 350, I've seen people prescribe 400, which is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, there are health risks that go along with this. I posted some studies in a group a while back talking about just risk of chronically elevated testosterone in your heart. Stroke risk goes up. I think from the research I've done and talking to the doc and kind of, again, putting the pieces together, I think around the probably 700 to 900 range is a good place for most people. So find a dosage or work with your doctor to find a dosage that puts you in that range, and that is going to allow you to recover your health markers, not cause long-term damage to your cardiovascular system. Because a lot of times the little things in the background that you're not seeing that are just cumulative over time that you just you're not going to know they're going on. So yeah, you can float around a 1500 total test and you're not going to feel anything physically going wrong with you, but in reality there might, it's a cumulative thing just going on subtly in the background. And to be completely honest, I mean, my doctor and I, because I've been on TRT for about going on 7 years this fall, I think. So we've kind of messed around with the dose. I don't notice any difference between being around 1,000 to 1,100 total and 700 total. I notice no difference whatsoever. So just, people kind of freak out around that lower dose, but that's what healthy TRT dose is in reality. As far as the cycle dosages to avoid, I don't really want to give out any kind of recommendations for that, simply because it's a risk versus reward thing for people. I think something to keep in mind is any time your hormones are in super physiological range, there's always risk of some kind of side effects and long-term effects. So it's the whole idea of get the most from the least, So that's always a good way to look at it. And another thing I think people miss the boat on too is just recovery. And a lot of people they'll do, if they do 12 weeks or whatever, 16 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever they do, and then they come back down to a TRT dosage, and then they check their blood work in 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and it's good. They're like, oh, okay, good to go, gonna start again. Well, in reality, they have had good blood work for about 2 weeks, maybe a week, and then, right back to destroying their blood work again. So have good blood work more often than you have bad blood work. That's a good, good rule of thumb, I think, for most people. But again, where you draw that line, there's so many factors. There's so many factors that really go into that. So it's hard for me to really comment on that. And again, it's a very individual thing as well, as far as how people metabolize things. Same thing with the TRT, one person could have total tests of 700 or 800 on 100 milligrams per week. Some people might be prescribed 200 to get the same effect. So that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. Everyone metabolizes things differently. So next question, meat eaters versus vegan, the 2018 trend. Okay. So this is a multi-part question. I hope I don't miss any of it, but I'll try to get it all. So, all right. This is an interesting one because there are several arguments in there with the vegan community. Obviously, mistreatment of animals, that's part of it. Health ramifications of meat eating. Now, this is where it gets tricky. So there are plenty of studies out there that show that eating saturated fats, eating cholesterol, and all those things are fine, and they can actually have health benefits in some cases. I have tons of, not tons, but I mean, I have blood work showing people eating high fat diets with lots of animal fats that look very good and that have actually improved their cardiovascular health by doing so. The issue is source, really, is what it comes down to. The issue is source. So typically a lot of these feedlot animals, your grain-fed, heavily grain-fed and fattened animals are not really good for you. If you say good for you, that's where a lot of the issues arise. So if you're eating fattier meats especially, they're going to be highly inflammatory fat profiles in these meats. The fatty acid profiles are going to be poor. If you are, so things like beef, fattier pork, and a lot of people that do ketogenic diets, they do a lot of fats and stuff, which is great. But these highly inflammatory fat sources, bacon, stuff like that, it can be okay depending on what it's coming from and how the animal's fed. So I think that's what I try to reiterate to people the most is a grass-fed, grass-finished cow is going to produce a different fatty acid profile and quality of meat than a, hormone-ridden, grain-fed feedlot cow. Okay. So same in your fat sources. You want things that don't oxidize easily. You want things that are, you want your monosaturated fats. You don't want too many of your polyunsaturated fats. You want, the list really goes on. There's a lot of things to consider when choosing foods. And I think that's, like I said, that's really where people miss the boat. I don't advocate being vegan, but I also do advocate quality meat sources. I do prefer, if I'm having someone eat fattier sources, I have them use grass-fed butter. I prefer that they use pastured eggs. So that's a great one. For example, a lot of terminology really gets people. So these meats, it'll say fed a no hormones, fed a vegetarian diet. Okay, well, it's fed a vegetarian diet. That's grain, duh. That's grain that is probably highly inflammatory fattening diet, fattening up the animal. Not going to produce probably a quality meat source that has a good fatty acid profile. Now, if it's something like chicken tenderloin, 99% lean ground turkey, well, there's not hardly any fat in it anyhow, so grass-fed doesn't really make sense, or pastured doesn't really make sense. And a lot of the quote-unquote toxins are stored in fatty tissues and fat cells, and those really aren't going to be there. So it's kind of a minimal issue at that point. But the eggs, like I said, going back to the eggs, free range is thrown around a lot. Free range doesn't really mean jack shit. A lot of the time the free ranges are cage free. They're just not in a cage. They're still inside of a building. They're still packed in. It's still fed garbage. Pastured. Okay, so pastured egg is actually out in a pasture and eating bugs and eating, whatever the hell else actual chickens eat. Grass, like I said, all this stuff that's naturally found in the ground, found in the soil, found in found in nature, and it's going to produce a lot better fatty acid profile. It's going to be less inflammatory. It's going to have more omega-3s, more MCTs, more of all that good stuff. So that's what, like I said, that's what I kind of try to get through to people, is that it's more of food selection than anything else. Now, if it's, if people are participating in veganism for a ethical issue, that's a hard thing, because no matter how good an animal is fed, and even if they're humanely slaughtered, there's some of these really quality sources, they do humane slaughtering. It's not a brutal process. It's quick and easy and it's efficient, but still they're killing an animal. So that's kind of a personal thing. People can do with that what they want. I don't really get into that argument. I have vegan clients, we work around it. But if it's just a matter of they think that meat is going to kill them, then I try to educate them on quality sources of meat, what the different sources are actually like, how to have quality sources of animal products in a diet, not these garbage, overly processed, feedlot type junk stuff. And try to, like I said, have that discussion with them. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. It's a hard question to answer because there are a couple sides to it. So next one, we are in, stress and CV health. We are in a stressful state of being. Are our hearts at risk for CV diseases at a younger age? I would say probably yes. I don't know if there's a study particularly, per se out there that looks at that in particular, but stress is going to be a contributor to cardiovascular health. It's going to be hard on the heart in general. It's going to cause inflammation, and we know that certain types of inflammation, like for example, people that have measured CRP levels or high sensitivity CRP levels, they're going to see that that's linked to cardiovascular disease potentially. So anyone that's walking around chronically stressed or chronically inflamed or anything like that, it's going to contribute to cardiovascular issues potentially. And I think that with the way that our society is now, I think that stress is undermanaged and it is very prevalent, and it's definitely going to contribute to CV issues at a younger age. Not that people are dying younger because modern medicine just keeps people alive. Not that even with poor quality life, keeps people alive. But I've talked about stress management a million times. You go back and search on my profile or whatever, I've got tons of stuff on it. So absolutely contributor. Let me see, there's some replies to this, see if there's any other good questions. Plant-based diet. And okay, so I pretty much covered that stuff already. So I think I pretty much covered that question for the most part. Two more. In this one, I already talked about a little bit before, so I'm not going to talk about it a bunch, but cardiac remodeling. So your opinion on enhanced bodybuilders using ACE inhibitors or ARBs year-round as a safeguard against RAAS activation and LVH from anabolics and growth hormones. So a lot of people might probably know what ACE inhibitors are. The ARBs, I actually pulled up a tab here just to read it, just so they explain it way better than I can explain it without fumbling over my words. So angiotensin 2 is a very potent chemical formed in the blood that causes muscles surrounding blood vessels to contract, thereby narrowing the vessels. The narrowing increases the pressure within blood vessels and can cause high blood pressure, aka hypertension. So angiotensin 2 receptor blockers, those are your ARBs, are medications that block the action of angiotensin 2 by preventing angiotensin 2 from binding to angiotensin 2 receptors on the muscles surrounding the blood vessels. As a result, the blood vessels enlarge or dilate, and blood pressure is reduced. Reduced blood pressure makes it easier for the heart to pump blood, can improve heart failure. In addition, the progression of kidney disease caused by high blood pressure, diabetes is slowed. So, all the indirect stuff that high blood pressure is going to cause can be reduced as well. So that's kind of what those are. The other, I'm going to read to you guys. Okay, so you guys know exactly what's going on here. No, that's not what I want. Okay. So RAAS activation, the most important system involved in regulation of systemic blood pressure and renal blood flow. Filtration of blood is called the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. So basically you're regulating blood pressure here. That's what all this is stemming back to, is essentially blood pressure regulation. ACE inhibitors and the ARBs are primarily blood pressure medications. So using these to control the RAAS system is what we're looking at. Now, when I answered this question before, I believe I said, I don't know for sure. See, the issue, what he's asking here is, are there any drawbacks to using these long term, especially the newer gen ARBs? Just because they do seem pretty safe in the research and for long term use, but some of the newer gen ARBs haven't been around long enough, so long term research is obviously limited. The answer, my answer is really, I don't know for sure. It's something that I want to discuss more with my doctor. On paper, it looks really good to prevent as a safeguard against RAAS activation. Now, is it overkill? Perhaps. How do we know that people have too much RAAS activation? I don't know. If somebody doesn't have any hypertension at all and they don't have any genetic predisposition to this, and maybe is it over? Like I said, maybe it could be overkill taking these drugs, or it could just be a preventative measure. Now, if we find in 5 years from now that these newer gen ARBs are extremely safe and there are no long-term drawbacks, perhaps in a lower dose, I think that this could be something that would be great for people that use PEDs, or just people in general that might be genetically predisposed to these issues, or have lifestyle that causes them to have these issues. So I just don't know for sure yet, because I just don't think we know enough in the long run to start jumping on these for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Not exactly sure. Best supplement regimen for improving HDL values, lowering LDL values. Okay. Well, there are a lot of things you can do to help with lipid values. It could be improving insulin sensitivity, making sure that you're consuming quality fatty acid profile in your foods. So going back to the things I talked about, if you're consuming meats, considering some of the things I talked about in one of the previous questions, getting your omega-3s in, not getting too many omega-6s in, yada, yada, yada. There's a bunch food-wise that you could consider. Cholesterol values, some people that have really low HDL values, they can just have low, they can have low values in general, and they will actually have to increase dietary cholesterol intake and fat intake. So our bodies are pretty good at regulating our actual circulating cholesterol, but sometimes consuming more can help. There's people on really low fat diets sometimes have low HDL values, but typically they have low LDL values as well. So you can normally see that in blood work. So with that, I would say make sure that dietary wise that is taken care of. And if it's not, increase fat, increase cholesterol values, or increase dietary cholesterol intake first. And supplementation wise, big fan of citrus bergamot. I use the Jar of Formulas brand. That is probably one of the best supplements for raising HDL values. that we've seen in recent years. I don't think there's a lot of good supplements out there for actually lowering LDL values. There are a couple. Some of the ones that people used to take, like red yeast rice, the component that actually lowered the values of or improved lipid values isn't even present in there anymore. So, that's not really useful. Beyond that, people are prescribed statin drugs a lot. Not really a fan if you can prevent it. There's too many other side effects, and they lower total cholesterol typically, which isn't necessarily what you want. So my goal with most people would be actually just to get HDL up as much as you can, and LDL is going to be a secondary worry. Now, if you do have LDL, high LDL, and maybe it's genetic, maybe it's just something that's crept up over the years, look at getting lipid particle size tested, actually see if that LDL is oxidizing or not, and whether it's problematic, whether you should be worried about it, because higher LDL isn't really an issue. I know most ranges go to about 100. I don't even blink if people are at 150. My doctor's same way. It's not really worried about it. We look at the lipid profile as a whole, get the particle size tested, see if those are oxidizing. A lot of the people that eat the diets that we eat are consuming a lot of dietary cholesterol anyhow, so we might have higher circulating cholesterol to begin with. So that's kind of it's not false positive. I mean, it is elevated LDL, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. So again, figure out if those things are oxidizing. There are some other components there, like CoQ10, ubiquinol, PQQ can be added to that. Things that help with minimizing oxidation. So they might not directly lower LDL, but they'll actually lower the amount that is going to oxidize, or potential for oxidation, which is going to be helpful. So I think that's the last question, guys. And just make sure that is it for cardiovascular health. And I will see you guys next week.